Hello, my name is Alex Landis, and today I will be covering go around and rejected landings. This is for anyone in general aviation and or in aviation in general. And I think this is important to denote to any student that this is not simply a private applicant thing. There is no shame in going around. That is something that needs to be made very, 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 very clear about going around, is that it is not an indictment necessarily on your ability to perform, because safety is of the utmost priority, and for whatever reason, if you need to go around, there is no shame in doing so. That is something that needs to be emphasized up front. So today we will be going over the go around and rejected landing. So the objective of this lesson is to ensure that we are safe. Ultimately, it's the utmost priority, but the objective is that the student, after this lesson and when we go and practice it, is able to properly use a go-around and understand when a go-around is necessary, and to follow the appropriate items that need to be followed, right? And the purpose, sometimes the approach and landing doesn't go as planned or as desired. There might be, it could potentially be your approach is unstable, you're at an altitude that is maybe too low, you can't meet the runway, or you're on the proper glide path, or whatever it may be. Or there might be obstructions on the runway, other aircraft, vehicles. Sometimes in airports there are animals like deer or more exotic animals, potentially if you're in the mountains, that might be on the runway that obviously we want to avoid at all costs, right? So being able to quickly identify these hazards, whether it be unstable approach or obstructions on the actual runway of intended use, we want to make sure that we can, within the blink of an eye, decide, okay, I need to go around, okay, this is not a safe condition for me to land. And this is something that every pilot should be able to do, because no pilot is perfect, and there are going to be situations where you're going to have to go around, even if you're an experienced pilot. There are sometimes those situations. For reference, for the sake of this video, I will spare showing the video that I would intend to use with a student, for the sake of time. There is specifically a video from Embry-Riddle that I've actually used on that monitor over there, it goes into detail and shows visual descriptions of when or how we can use a go-around, and the visual cues that we can use to effectively carry out a go-around. But in terms of our content that we will be covering today, that I will be delivering for the student, is again showing why we do it. And so using maybe going and quizzing the student on, okay, what do you think are necessarily some reasons why you would go around? Why would you go around as a student pilot or as a private pilot or a commercial pilot? Why would you go around? And we'd have a discussion going back and forth about what are scenarios where we would execute a mixed approach. And then from there, we would go into the procedures of a mixed approach. We need to have these procedures down relatively quickly, and they're not excessive. They're pretty simple procedures, but understanding what they are, so we can quickly identify them and quickly go through them, is very, very important for us and for our safety and for the safety of others as well. There's little to no margin of error. Making the decision to go around, you can't go wrong making that decision. That is the safest decision that you can make. And it can even be asked of us. So we need to be prepared even when we are in a stable approach, and even when there's no obstructions on the airstrip, because ATC could ask us to go around for whatever reason. I have personally had that happen before. If someone else cuts you off in the pattern or whatever it may be, ATC can ask you to go around. So the first thing you want to do in this maneuver is full power first. Full power, whether it be in our archers, it's a little throttle looking lever, or you have a little throttle knob that you'll be using. You always want to make sure it's full power first. That's the first thing that you do. And you're usually in a configuration to land, so adding that full power will affect other phases of flight that we will, or other areas of correctly entering this maneuver, if you will, that we will talk about here in a couple of minutes. The mixture, we always want to make sure that the mixture is full rich. And on a stable approach, or on an approach to land, the mixture should be rich already. That is part of the descent and approach checklist, is mixture full rich. But in order to make sure that the mixture is full rich, we should always double check to make sure on a go around the mixture is full rich, and if it is not, it should be set to full rich for the go around maneuver. And if necessary, in an aircraft, and the Archer we don't necessarily worry about it, but in the 172 that I got my private in, we also had to make sure that the carb heat is in the desired configuration. In this case, we would close back the carb heat in an attempt to make it go around. And then the next thing, after you have your throttle, your mixture, and your carb heat all configured properly, we want to increase the pitch. And now this, so in a landing, right, we're going to usually have full flaps. Once we add the throttle, we're going to have an increase in power, right? So when we increase this power, we want to make sure that we're not increasing too much of the pitch, right? Because when you increase the power, right, power for altitude, pitch for airspeed is the common is what we commonly associate with when we're coming to an approach to land. Power for altitude, pitch for airspeed. So when we put in the power, what are we going to do? And for a private applicant, they hopefully, if they're long in their training, they'll understand this, but given when we would introduce this, it'd probably be early on, so maybe they wouldn't fully grasp those concepts. For a commercial applicant, I would definitely expect them to know, okay, you add power, you're going to gain altitude, right? So when we add this power, this full power, and we pitch, one common mistake is that you pitch too high, right? Which would then induce, given the configuration we're in with the trim for an approach to landing, and with the flap settings, if we put full power in those configurations to land and then pitch, we can excessively pitch, right? Which would then induce a power on stall, which we definitely do not want to do close to the ground. The last thing we want to do close to the ground is stall the aircraft, because then we might not have enough altitude to recover safely, and we could risk damage to the aircraft, or tragically, we might even risk our own lives. So when we're pitching back, we pitch just enough to induce a positive rate of climb, right? And we do not want to pitch over the horizon and stall the aircraft, right? So there are situations where we add full power and we pitch, we might even have to add a little bit of forward pressure. Now, not so much forward pressure where we're going back down towards the ground, because we're still trying to climb out, but enough forward pressure to counteract the configuration that we're in addition to adding that full throttle, right? And then once we pitch up, right, we're going to pitch up. So we go power up, pitch up, clean up, right? That is what we usually use for a missed approach and instrument training, but it is also effective for a missed approach for even a student pilot, right? So in instrument training, you go power up, pitch up, clean up, fess up, right? And we talk, right? And the same can be said about this. Once we clean up, so we're going to run through, for the cleanup part first, we're going to gradually, once we have that positive rate of climb, and if there's an obstacle at the end of the runway, that will determine whether or not we climb out at VX or VY, right? If there's an obstacle at the end of the runway that we have to clear, we want to climb out at VX, right? And in a situation where there's no obstacles, we can survive with a VY climb, right? So, and then after we have all that set up, we're pitched appropriately. We're trying to configure for our climb, all right? So we're going to properly adjust the trim. We're going to properly adjust the trim. We're going to start gradually retracting the flaps once we're in that VX or that VY climb. Gradually, that's the key. We don't want to dump the flaps because then because the flaps, right, they're a high lift device, right, a high lift device. And if we lose our lift while we're trying to climb out, we could, again, if we do it too quickly, we could induce a stall, which we do not want to do that low to the ground. So, and then we want to, while we're cleaning up, we want to make sure, okay, we're going to run through the GUMPS checklist, right, which is gas. Okay, is our throttle and our mixture full rich, right? Undercarriage, if we have retractable landing gear. For a missed approach or a go-around, we're going to make sure that we are retracting that landing gear. Because when we come into land, remember, it's extended, right? So then when we go around, we want to retract that landing gear. And so we have the gas, the throttle's full, undercarriage, retract landing gear, mixture, full rich on the go-around, right? We want to make sure that's there. The prop for the Archer or any other fixed-pitched propeller, we're not necessarily going to need to adjust the blade angle, but in an aircraft where the pitch of the propeller is adjustable, we're going to want to adjust that to a climb attitude for the propeller blade angles, right? And then seat belts. We want to make sure we're still buckled in. So once you run through that GUMPS checklist and we're on the climb out, we should be good to go. And we're going to climb out back to pattern altitude or do whatever ATC tells us to do. So we're going to transition to normal climb once we have all those things met. We're going to make sure we're in VY. We're going to make sure we're trimmed out for that climb, right? And we're configured to climb effectively as if we were doing a touch and go, even like to do whatever ATC tells us or to come back around to land again, right? The cues, go around decision point. So once we decide that we're going around, you execute that go around. Once there's any doubt to your safety, you execute the go around, because you can always, if you go around, you can always come back to land. But if you land when you shouldn't, you might not always be able to go back around, right? So we also make sure that pitch and that trim is good, right? The nose should not be above the horizon. You should not aggressively pull the nose above the horizon. That I've said before, but you cannot emphasize that enough, because we are at such a low altitude coming into land that any stall could prove to be fatal. We want to make sure that airspeed, remember going over these again, we make sure that airspeed is at VX or VY, depending on the obstacles or scenario for the situation necessary. And then once we are established, once we are configured, once we run through our GUMPS checklist and we're climbing again, we want to make sure we run through our climb checklist, right? Because we are no longer descending, we're not an approach to land checklist, we are now climbing again, so we need to run through that climb checklist. And then before that even, or whenever we are stable, we communicate with ATC, saying, hey, Purdue 52 is going around, or whatever they need to know. Whenever you are, you have everything good to go, you cleaned it up, you got your checklist, you fess up. That's the thing you do. You fess up. You communicate with ATC, indicating that, hey, we're going around. They need to know. And then also understanding this is a visual maneuver. You need to keep your eyes outside of the aircraft, and you can glance in, look at your airspeed, but keep your eyes outside of the aircraft so you know when to indicate, okay, is my pitch too high? Am I too low? Where am I going, right? And you want to visually scan and know the situation that your aircraft is in. Errors that often occur when conducting a go-around are delayed decision. When in doubt, remember, when in doubt, you can always go around. You will never regret a go-around. You will regret not going around in some situations. So when in doubt, go around. When in doubt, go around. You need to ingrain that into your head as a student, and to my head as a potential CFI, and any aviator's mental process is that you can always go around. When in doubt, go around. You're never too experienced to go around. The left turning tendencies are also something that can affect. So whenever you're climbing again, this left turning tendency will be more pronounced, right? So we need to maintain that right rudder to counteract that left turning tendency to remain on the center line, or to not veer off from where we are going in our go around. You need to use that right rudder, significant right rudder pressure in this go around procedure. We also, again, the tendency to overpitch. We want to make sure we're not overpitching. Why? And I would ask my student why, because we've gone over it multiple times, and they should understand you overpitch and you stall, that can be fatal, right? So that is one of the biggest things that we need to focus on in a go-around maneuver, is to not overpitch the aircraft, and to understand how easy it is to overpitch the aircraft given the configuration with the trim and the flaps that's set for a descent, right? So I can make overpitching the aircraft in that configuration relatively easy. Another thing that can happen is we can fight the configuration on our go-around approach. So we want to make sure that once we have everything good to go, we want to trim out the aircraft, which will allow us to go through the checklist and other things like that, while we're still aviating first, right? Aviate, navigate, communicate, right? So we're still aviating, but having the trim setting will allow us to aviate a lot more effectively, right? Flaps and gear, remember, retract them slowly, right? And retract the flaps slowly, and the gear as well, because if we're not in a spot where we're high enough up off the ground, if we retract our flaps too quickly, we could lose that altitude, which could, again, prove to be very, very dangerous. And clear of obstructions, again, this goes back to the VX and the VY, independent on the airport or the strip or wherever we're at. If there are obstructions, we will climb over them at VX, right? Which in the Archer I believe is 64 knots, and VY if there are no obstructions, which would be 76 knots, right? And for the completion standards, right, we want to be, for testing purposes, right, for the ACS, we want to maintain VY at plus or minus plus 10, minus 5 knots for a private pilot. And we have that plus 10, right, because the minus 5 is a lot more, being below that VX or that VY speed is a lot more dangerous than being above it, within reason. And 5 plus or minus 5 knots for commercial students. And that is all that I have for go-around or rejected landings. So with that, thank you so much for making it through this presentation. I hope that you learned something from it. And hope to see you next time.